Good morning, comrades. Hope everyone's doing well. Go ahead and like, comment, and subscribe, please. And we're going to talk about Ramses the Damned, Cleopatra. Um, Cleopatra. Cleopatra something. It'll be in the title. So, I took some notes. So this is a continuation of the Ramses the Damned story from my previous review, or if you've read the book. I didn't know this existed until I was like kind of glancing through stuff. I read Ramses the Damned a long time ago, and I read it again to review it for this, and I like it. It's very erotic, which is so. Anne Rice has like a spectrum of eroticism, and some of her books are straight up like bondage erotica, like the Sleeping Beauty ones. I'm trying to remember what they're called. She writes them under a pseudonym. And then there's like the Mayfair Witches, which is super erotic. And then, kind of like there's this and some other stuff. And then some of them are kind of just like stories with like erotic elements. Like she definitely has that like romantic, like that romance novel style where it's like very detailed and very lurid and very sensual across the board. But her most famous work, I would say, or her most famous work, period, is like the Vampire Chronicles. And I would say they're very not erotic. Like they definitely have erotic elements, but that's never like the focus. While with this series of books, it's interesting because so her son Christopher Rice, who's an author of his own right, I think he has like a detective series that I've never looked into, but maybe I should, because he co-wrote this one with his mom, and then the third book, which I'm currently reading right now, he wrote by himself. And I'm actually liking these later books better than the first one, because the first one is kind of like a very stereotypical, like, oh, the British in like the 1910s, it's all before World War One, are they're like into Egypt and shit. And so this guy Lawrence Strafford, he goes to like do Egypt stuff, and then he gets killed by his nephew. I mean, you've seen my review. If not, you can go see it on BitChute, YouTube, or Rumble. But the gist of it is, it's kind of like a very like a mummy story, like one you would see like the old mummy story, with a lot more lurid elements. Like because the thing is, the mummies that come to life, like Cleopatra and Ramses, the drought that brings them back to life makes them super horny. Well, makes them just kind of like always hungry for like things, right? Very gluttonous in that regard, if you will, and that includes sex. So it's food, drink, sex. Just like experiencing things, like because they're never like quite filled, and so they are constantly in like had this desire. So there's some very lurid scenes in the first book, like several, and then in the second book they exist, but they're like less frequent and less like time consuming, if you will. And the thing is really focused a lot more on the story. And while it has like elements of erotica, it's not really the focus. And then when I'll talk about the third book when I finish it. Cruising through it because it's actually really interesting. There's like a whole nother element. Well, it's like the focus on the story is like predominant. Well, like the lurid kind of sensual stuff is like very backseat. It's much more like the Vampire Chronicles generally, I would say. So I like it, and then so I might have to like check out this Christopher Rice and some of his other books because pretty good so far. Okay, so. The other key difference with this one, or the other expanded thing with this Cleopatra one, the second book in the series, that I really like, is that it expands upon like the immortal stuff. So the book actually starts going back like further in time than any of this stuff that's going on. And we meet, oh shoot, where's my note? We meet, yeah, I can't remember. We meet a woman, Tonike. She's like this ancient queen from this empire that existed like thousands of years before like Ramses even existed. And remember, Ramses is like thousands of years old. So it's this ancient like African empire that was like ruled like most of the known world, and they were like super powerful, and it was very peaceful. And the queen of it, she was like an herbologist or like an alchemist, and she just like was always mixing plants and trying stuff out. And eventually, she found this like elixir of immortality, and so she was able to make herself immortal. And then she made like her prime minister immortal. But then he became like a Marcus Antony from like the first book, where he wanted to create like an immortal army, and they kind of sort of did that, but there was like a lot of problems with that. And so the queen, as I will refer to her until I remember her name, was like, no, we're done. And they had like a falling out, and they separated, and they can't like do anything about each other because they are both immortal. And so this other guy, Saktu, something like that, he had a bad name. That's how I kind of remember it. he spent a lot of time, and he was able to craft like a impure elixir. So he was able to create immortals, but the immortals would die. They weren't like super immortal, so they've lived for like thousands of years. Him and the queen. But these mortals that he was creating with his drought were only staying alive for like a couple hundred years, and then they were dying, and he was very distraught about it. And at some point, they came to head. They went to like a convention out in like the Middle East somewhere, and they got into like a brawl where he was going to like capture her and try to take the potion or force her or something. But what he didn't realize is that she had discovered a way to kill the immortals, to take the immortality away and destroy them. And so she had destroyed one of his minions, and he was like, whoa! And she's like, you better get the fuck out of here and not bother me ever again. In fact, you go to the British Isles and you stay there and never leave. And he was like, yup. So he did. So a lot of the interesting story actually revolves around them. Like, Ramses was kind of an interesting character, but he was also kind of a boring character in the first book, and that does not change. Julie being an immortal, because Ramses made her his immortal like lover in the previous book, she's a lot more interesting of a character, and she has a lot more depth and growth, while Ramses is just kind of like stomping around and being angry. As the name of this book implies, a heavy focus on this story is about Cleopatra. So Cleopatra was destroyed in the last book, and then she kind of reconstituted, and then she met this doctor guy, and the doctor guy is like taking care of her, and then they kind of like go around, and she's like unearthing like treasure troves that she had hidden when she was queen, and doing all this stuff. They're like down in Africa doing that stuff. And then all of a sudden she starts having like pains or like weird memories, or feels like she's losing her mind. And then she's meeting this like other woman in like her subconscious named Sybil. So who's Sybil? Sybil is a woman. She's an American author. She's an American author who's the child with her two asshole brothers of a rich like merchant family, but they've been kind of falling on hard times. Like, they just haven't had like the monopoly they used to have, or like the recession, or whatever's going on, thanks to planned economies. But she has always had like dreams and like experiences in like, you know, kind of feeling out of her body of like Egypt and like Egyptian stories. And so she wrote a lot, and she studied a lot, and she's written like tens of books. And I say tens of books, it seems like she's written like 40 or 50 of these like Egyptian novels that are like world famous. So the family has tons of money, but that's because she's like a famous author. And she's had these dreams a lot about this guy who she didn't know what his name was or whatever, because again, her dreams are not like the whole historical fact, but essentially she possesses like the soul of Cleopatra after, you know, Cleopatra was like dead, and I guess like there's reincarnation because her soul like passed on, or some essence of her soul passed on, and then Sybil's like the current owner of that. And Sybil looks, the way it's described in the book, exactly like Cleopatra. So like when Ramses meets her later, he's like stunned. And same thing with Alex, who is Cleopatra's like lover, who's the son of Edward. It's Edward, right? The Count, who was made immortal also last book. They both see her, they see Sybil, and they're like stunned because she looks almost identical to Cleopatra. I think she has blonde hair, the way it was described, if I remember correctly. But other than that, she looks exactly like Cleopatra, because she kind of is. So what starts to happen is Cleopatra starts to lose her mind, and she keeps seeing Sybil, and then she's like forgetting things and she's having like pains, and then they're like super twins, where like anything that like Sybil experiences, Cleopatra experiences, and vice versa. So for example, there's a point where Cleopatra gets like bonked on the back of the head, and then Sybil gets like knocked out almost, like she like falls over. And the closer they get together, the more this happens. So Sybil's in America, and she's starting to have like weird thoughts and dreams, even weirder than like the one she bases her story on. And then she sees in the newspaper article the engagement of Ramses with Julie, because Julie's like, you know, she's a famous owner of like a famous trading company, because her dad like left it all to her. And so she's marrying this like quote unquote like rich Egyptian guy that she met while she was in Egypt, and everyone's like, it's like the talk of the town, and they're having a big engagement party. So Sybil's like, I gotta go because I gotta see. This guy looks so familiar. So she heads over to England, and then Cleopatra gets it in her mind that she needs more of the elixir, because more of the elixir is going to like cure all her problems. And so she's like, I got to go track down Ramses, even though I was trying to avoid that whole situation. And so she starts heading back up, and Samir informs Ramses and Julie that that Cleopatra's like on the move, because he's got like spies down in Egypt and like Alexandria and stuff, where she was at and that she's taking a ship up to England. All right. So meanwhile, the Queen is also moving to England because she gets wind that there's some like shenanigans going on with like her old prime minister, the Sakhtun or whatever his name is, and so she goes and like buys essentially the rights to like an estate, like from like a noble family that's like on hard times, and she's like, look, I'll give you some money, because she has like unlimited wealth essentially, because she's been alive for like thousands of years and is immortal. So she's gonna like rent the place out forever for as long as she sees fit. She's gonna redo the whole thing, and she's just gonna pay them a bunch of money, and then they can have it back whenever she's like done with it. And they're like, yeah, sounds great. So she's there, and she's got her two homies who are like super big, strong dudes that she bangs, and they have like a three-way scene at some point. And then she's like investigating this whole situation, and she finds out that because Edward, he's in like Monte Carlo gambling and like earning money back for his family, because if you remember, he was trying to marry Alex off to Julia so he could get access to like the Stratford wealth from the shipping company. But now that Alex is like out of the picture, and now he's immortal, he's like, well, I can go play cards. And so he's gambling a lot and making a ton of money and having like gay sex because he's gay. But anyway, one of the prostitutes that he's having sex with gets like essentially attacked by these like other immortals, and they're the immortals that are like the goons of Sakhtun. So they're like the temporary immortals, and we learn from them that they end up waking up Sakhtun, because he's like, don't ever wake me up until you get like until you have access to like the true formula or something. So they wake him up because they're like, hey, we tracked down this Ramsey guy. He seems to have the true formula. He's not related to the Queen, so we can go get him. We have this whole plan where they're going to like kidnap Julie, who's also an immortal, and then they're going to like torture her with these like immortal dogs, and then Ramses will have to give us like the potion, the drought recipe, so that we can use it, and then everything will be good. He's like, all right, that sounds good. But another trick that the Queen has, because she has all sorts of tricks, is another like alchemist thing she discovered, is that she has like an immortal animal. So she has an immortal cat, Basset, with her, that she can like spread like powder on her face, and then she can kind of take possession of Bastet. And so she uses that to spy on this whole council, and she realizes what's going on. So she's like, now I am going to the engagement ceremony. So everyone meets up at the engagement ceremony. Oh, including Cleopatra's like doctor lover, because he's super upset at Sybil because Sybil's causing problems for Cleopatra, and then Cleopatra like attacked him, and he's like head over heels in love with her. All right, so everyone meets up at the thing, and Samir's like, oh, hey, Cleopatra's like here. And so Julie goes to meet her to talk to her, because her biggest concern is that she's going to like interfere with Alex's life and like ruin his life, because she's being a total Karen, to be completely honest, because let Cleopatra and Alex be together. I don't see the problem. But, and we finally meet Alex's mom, who's super sweetheart, and she's so excited to just not to deal with her crazy gay husband, and that she can just have money again and do what she wants, because she's like an American heiress as well. So that's like, they were like living off her like leftovers, and she goes and gets like her jewelry and everything and throws this great party, and the party's super funsies. But then the crazy guy shows up and like tries to attack Sybil, and then Ramses like follows him and like is about to kill him but lets him go, and then rescues Sybil, and then but then the Queen's there, and she kills him and is like, get rid of this motherfucker. And so her like team of goons, take care of that problem. And she's like, hey, Ramses, go find Julie and any other immortals that you're friends with, and make sure they don't drink the champagne. And then come see me here. And then she like pieces out. Meanwhile, Julie and Cleopatra are in the area where the trap's supposed to be set off, but the people that are supposed to like set the trap off aren't there, and so they're just like arguing and chatting. But then Cleopatra, I think it's Cleopatra, does something and like opens up the hole in the ground, and instead of being like, oh, we shouldn't jump down this hole, Cleopatra's like, adios, and she jumps down this hole, so she gets kidnapped and taken back to Sakhtun. Meanwhile, at the party, Julie comes up, meets Ramses, is like, oh, I'm so worried about Cleopatra, this and that. And he's like, and he like slaps the champagne out of her hand or whatever. No, he just says, don't drink it. Just pretend to drink it. And so they're like, oh, we're going to celebrate. Hooray. And then they both pretend to drink it. And then all the immortals that are there to like set up the trap drink it, and they all die. Because the Queen laced all the champagne with the potion that kills immortals. Da, da, da. So then they all go hang out at her estate, and she kind of gives them the whole lowdown about how she's like some super immortal and all this stuff, and they talk about this and that, and they've rescued Sybil because she got knocked out because Cleopatra got knocked out. And they are like, we got to protect Sybil, and we got to, I want to rescue Cleopatra, and then Ramses is having a real hard time being like not the super king, because he's like the secondary king because she's the queen, and she's like, she could fuck you up, all this stuff. She has like all the stuff, and it's, essentially they come to a plan where they're gonna rescue Cleopatra, and she's like, don't kill Sakhtun, I want him, but you can kill the rest of them, I don't care, they're abominations. And they have a long conversation about, because Cleopatra gets called like a Oh no, this is later when Cleopatra shows up. Okay, so then she sends her goons with them, and they go to like rescue, and they beat the shit out of all the immortals and kill a bunch of them, and then they grab the guy and drag him back, and they rescue Cleopatra, and Cleopatra's like super mad, and they have to like, kind of like hold her down because she was being eaten by the dogs essentially and tortured, and then finally because she didn't want to reveal who she was, and she's kind of losing her mind, so she didn't want to let this crazy guy know that she doesn't remember who she is. But eventually, right when she's like starting to reveal stuff, that's when Ramses and the goons and Julie like show up and like take care of business. So then everyone heads back to the queen's estate, and Sybil and Cleopatra get to meet, and they're like super best friendsies forever. These now, not quite though. They have like some words, and Alex is somehow involved with this whole thing. I don't think Edward shows up. He's like off doing nothing for most of this book, and then. Let me check my notes. Relentless Revenge. Caesarian. Okay. Yeah. So, yes. So then Cleopatra they like have a conversation with her. She's like, I'll be okay. Just leave me alone. And then she goes and gets Alex, and then her and Alex like fall in love again. And then they head off to like somewhere in Scotland to like have the sex. And then Sybil like follows after them, and she brings like all her books that she wrote, and she gives them to Cleopatra so Cleopatra can remember everything that Sybil knew. And there's a whole thing where the guy calls Cleopatra like a noctune or some terrible derogatory term, and then the queen is like, no, that's not true. He has no idea what he's talking about. He's talking about something completely different. He used a different drought. It has nothing to do with what you are. You are who you are. You're fine. And then Cleopatra's like, okay, thank you, my queen. Good stuff there. So then Sybil and Alex and Cleopatra all have like a polyamorous relationship up there in the Isle of Man or somewhere. Meanwhile, Ramses and Julie, they kind of go back to their life in England. Ramses studies a lot with the queen and kind of learns the language and is like interpreting stuff. And she gives him some of the like kill an immortal potion and some other stuff just so they can practice. Oh, the dogs. One of the guys uses the dogs to like help fight the immortals, and then the dogs love him forever after that, and then they bring him back, and they're all like best friends forever with like Bastet and everything, so it's super adorbs. But that kind of wraps it up. So at the end of this book, which is important to know where everyone's at and what everyone's doing, because the third book picks up immediately afterwards. But so everyone's safe, everyone's well. The one thing that happens, so then they interrogate what's his face, Socktoon or whatever his name is, and then the queen's like, you can go, and he's like, and then she says something really like mysterious to him. She's like, you have to decide what to do with your life from now on, and he's like, the fuck. And then he gets to like this bridge, and he's crossing the bridge over like to get out of there, and he sees a mirror, and he looks in the mirror, and his eyes are brown. Dun dun dun. So the queen has a way to take immortality away, and so the guy is so distraught because he's lived for thousands of years, and now he's just immortal, and he's going to die, and he throws himself off the bridge and kills himself. So that's where he's at. So his whole crony system of like corrupted immortals and all that stuff, that's adios for good. We don't have to deal with that shit no more. Julie and Ramses head back home and finish their ceremony and just enjoying life. Edward is like out being gay and making money and doing other stuff. The doctor's dead. Cleopatra, Sybil, and Alex are polyamoring it up in like some island off the coast of Ireland, I think. And then the queen and her crew are just hanging out. They're all staying in contact, except Cleopatra. She wants nothing to do with anybody. But yeah, that's where we leave off. Oh, and then it's World War I is starting to kick off. So that's the end of that. I liked it. I liked it a lot. Like I said at the beginning, I enjoyed it more than the first book. It was a lot more stuff going on. I liked the introduction of like the more like immortal world, and there was like some more kind of like magic-y alchemy stuff. Oh, we also learned, I totally forgot about this, that the queen had like a best friend that she was like also an alchemist, and they were like hanging out, and that woman one day she like left and came back and she was dead, and the potion was like stolen or something, and that's Ramses. But she's forgiven Ramses because that was like thousands of years ago, and he's done like good things. Like he helped Egypt, he didn't do anything corrupt with it, he didn't try to create some weird army, he's not like an asshole or anything. So she's like, you know what, it's been a long time, I forgive you. And he's like, I'm sorry. And he's like, yeah, it is what it is. I mean, mortals are going to die eventually anyway. So they don't really dwell too much on that, which is nice. But yeah, the expanded world building is excellent. They really took like, it's like the vampire stuff. Like you read the first couple of books and it's like, oh, there's some vampires. And then you get to the end, you're like, holy shit, what in the world? There's a book 2 of this, and I'm already like, oh, there's a lot of stuff going on. And then it expands even further in the third book, but I won't spoil that here. Wait till I finish reading all that. But it's good. And if you look at like her extended like World of Darkness universe, essentially everything's like in the same world, so everything's kind of secretive. So that's why there's not like a lot of overlap. The Mayfair Witches and the Vampire Chronicles like really hard lay over each other, but the rest of the stuff, it's like the assumption is it all exists in the same universe, but there's not like there's not like a lot of direct reference, like her werewolf stuff or angel stuff or any of that other stuff. Servant of Bones and whatnot. And then her like hardcore erotica under the other pen name is like a totally separate thing. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. I would say it's worth reading the first book, which I would kind of give like a C, because this book is like a B plus, A minus. And the next book has already started off being pretty good. So this series is definitely something if you're into any of her Vampire Chronicles stuff, or just like good kind of like erotic horror, romantic horror, whatever you want to call it. It's good stuff, and enjoyed it thoroughly. Cool. Well, again, thanks for listening. Like, comment, subscribe, and I will catch you guys later. Bye.